What's up, YouTube? Just wanted to reach back out to you guys to have a little bit more of a conversation about what we've been talking about for the last couple of days. Before we get started, if you guys can do me a favor, hit that like, share, and subscribe. It really help me grow the channel. Comment. Anything will help me in the algorithm, so I appreciate it. So, like I said, this is back on the deserving aspect of attracting, who you want in your life, right? So back to attracting, who you are instead of what you want, right? A lot of times we don't realize that that other person deserves a catch as well, right? So we're often so busy and so consumed with getting who we want as a person, we don't realize that that person's getting us, right? We haven't worked on a lot of things. We have a lot of baggage that may fall on us from previous relationships, and there's things that we may need to do to improve ourselves that we just haven't done, whether that be your size, as far as your weight or whatnot, and just being in shape, taking the best care of yourself. For guys, it boils down to really, making sure you're in good shape. You're presenting the best foot, putting your best foot forward when it comes to dating, right? So what I mean by that, so you can't want a girl to be, looking good, smelling good, have all these great qualities and traits that you want, and in return, she's not getting what she desires, what her dream guy is. Yeah, and I guess that's the best question. Are you someone else's dream person, right? And now you might be someone's dream person as you stand right now, right? So that's important to say, because while you may be looking at someone else who's your dream person, where you currently stand, you may already be someone's dream person. And that particular dream person, you being that particular person's dream person, you may not even need to change who you are. For example, I grew up with people who, in my eyes, I wanted someone different. No shade to them. Let's say I'm crushing on someone else, right? I have a super crush, one of the popular girls at my school at the time. And in my mind, that's what I wanted. That's what I was going to put in my effort for. But at that, years later, I found out there were a couple of girls that I went to school with who I was their end-all, be-all. As I stood at that particular point, so I had to, I was changing who I was to measure up to this particular girl that I like, who I had a crush on. But as I stood at that very moment, these particular girls, it's two that I can think of, and, it's happened at different times. As I stood right then and there, I was it for them. I was the end-all, be-all. If I had decided that, I wanted them, we could have made this thing happen. I'm married now, and, luckily we're each other's dream people, but I had to work on myself to that. And, I'll follow back up on that, a little bit later on in the conversation. But, when I think back about all the things I had to change about myself, some were good. Some things I needed to change, as far as style, confidence, swagger, things like that. Because I was a nerd, right? And there's nothing wrong being a nerd, and I'm still a nerd to this day, and I'll never change that. But I delved into more of a street lifestyle because, honestly, when I was growing up, that's what we went into. And to be honest, that really hasn't changed that much as I've gotten older. I'm 41, soon to be 42. Women are still attracted to the bad boys. So I sought to emulate a bad boy persona, and that part I could have left out, right? Because luckily, I was blessed enough to get out of that unscathed, right? So I was able to make it out of there, by God's will, to where I didn't have to suffer any of the things that come along with the street life. I made a lot of dumb mistakes, did a lot of dumb decisions, but yet, things worked out for me. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that for everyone. That's why one of my famous sayings I used to say to everybody: not everybody gets to make the same mistakes, right? Not everybody gets to survive mistakes, and that's one of the biggest lies that people tell Younger people now is like, oh, you need to have fun, make mistakes, and learn from them. Not every mistake you can come back from, right? You know, choosing the wrong person to father a child with, that's not a mistake you can come back from. You might still end up being okay, but it's not a mistake that you can just bounce back from, right? And obviously, there are a lot far worse. Sorry about that, guys. Had a phone call come through. I called them back. Um, sorry for the technical difficulties. But yeah, so there's a lot of mistakes you can come back from, right? So, what I wanted to really dive into is that, hey, just because I made it through my mistakes, those are things that I did to chase people that I'm not even with right now. And it was a fleeting romance at best, right? However, if I would have just focused on the positive aspects of making a change for myself, and those particular women would have gotten a great version of me, right? And they would have loved me for who I was, because at the end of the day, I was the end all be all for them, right? So I bring up that point because a lot of times, guys and girls have people out there who would love them for who they are, right? You're that person's dream person, right? But yet we're seeking to go after people that, for lack of a better way of saying it, you're not their dream person. And you spend your time trying to convince them that you can be that dream person for them. And it just doesn't work that way, right? Because what happens is, if you're not, let's say you do get this person's attention, right? Let's say for a guy. And so you get a girl's attention because you stepped your game up, you've done all these things, but essentially you haven't grown into the person that she's into, right? Because you're spending the money and you don't have the money. You're pretending to be, even though you may aspire to be this person, you haven't done the work to be that person. You end up resenting that person because of all the effort that you had to put in to get them. And for them, like, for example, let's say you move in heaven and earth to make a date happen, right? You work some extra hours at your job, you got all these things going on, and you finally get the date with them. You spend all this money on them, and they take it, they don't make a big deal out of it. Meanwhile, it's a big deal to you, right? You end up resenting, like, they're not appreciative for all the effort. Because you put yourself on a level you weren't prepared for. That's their normal level. That's what a date is to them, versus to you, it was everything. You put everything into it. And I'll give you guys another example, and you probably heard it said before. The person that likes you don't have to do all that. And it took me too long to realize that. I didn't realize that to maybe my mid to late 20s. Like those who like you, right? I would spend a lot of my effort, especially in my early 20s, chasing after women who just really were not that into me. And what I mean by that, because I had to jump through hoops to get them. And the majority of the time, I'd say 75% of the time, it never really went anywhere. Even if it went somewhere, if you catch my drift, it didn't go anywhere. Like, it was too much effort involved to get to that particular piece of the puzzle. And then it was like, I didn't jump through all these hoops to get this, and it ain't it. And now, this person, they finally, you do a disservice to that person. And I think, for me, it was a little bit of a get back. I was like, oh, this person dissed me, or they weren't feeling me, so I'm going to get them now. So, I mean, I was in, stroking my ego. And so now, let's say this person finally breaks, right? And, now they're into you because you put on this Prince Charming act. And now they're into you, and you're really sitting back and saying, man, if I got to maintain this particular person, I'm not good. And that's what happens to a lot of people. You hear a phrase called, you meeting their representative. They're doing everything they can to get you, and then they start resenting all the hoops that they had to be to get you. And I mean, I had instances, few and far between, but when I was really jumping into the game, where I was my true self and I didn't feel like I had to, put on airs. But I'm not going to lie to you guys. Sometimes I put on airs because I was so attracted to the person and that I was willing to do above and beyond. The only thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't lie. I would delve into a part of myself that wasn't fully developed, is the best way to say it. Like, I'm bossing her. Like, I remember I had a young lady I was chasing, and anytime she, linked up, she always wanted to go and, go out. Now, she wasn't an extravagant person as far as, like, wanting me to spend money on her per se. But, going out, I just wasn't financially prepared to go out all the time. And, that's how she enjoyed herself. So, at the time, let's say we're going out, we're spending, $60 to $100, just dinner and drinks, but you want to do that all the time, that adds up, And now, and at the time I really didn't have like to do that, but I leaned into that character because that's what it took in my mind to date her. Like, she just didn't want to hang out. Even though it wasn't over the top, like it would be just, little bars, stuff like that. She wasn't like, oh, let's, spend a couple $100s on me on a date. But I didn't have the monetary means to be out all the time. And I was so into her that I wasn't willing to put my foot down and say, hey, let's not go out, let's do this. I'm just being honest. And, with people that I wasn't really that into but were still cute, I would always put my foot down. Like, no, I'm not going out. No, I'm not doing this. And it wasn't until I adapted that particular characteristic all the time that my luck changed, right? So this all goes into, you have to become the person you want to be, and you have to become someone's dream person authentically to get who you want. If you're not being who you're supposed to be authentically, you're going to end up resenting that person because you changed for them instead of changing for yourself. Once I became authentically who I am, I attracted who I wanted. I attracted my dream girl. But it took me time to realize that I'm enough. And it sounds weird, because a lot of people say, oh, you're enough, you're enough. You're enough for your person. You may not be enough for another person that's outside of your league. And that's the best way to say it. You may be enough for your 5 or your 6, or your 7. Well, I hate to use 7 because 7 is the default average. It's the number that everybody uses when they don't want to seem cocky, but they still want to say they look good. But you're enough for that person. You may not be enough for the 10 that you want. And once you got to realize is that if you're putting forth your best effort and, you're still not making a person choose you, then you may not be the person for them. And your enough may not be enough for them. You're enough, that's like me saying I go to a job and I'm saying at a job that, oh my God. That's all I want to say, guys. I'll catch up with you another time. Thank you.